Okay, sweet. So, hi everybody. My talk is going to be on Flexboxes. So, what are Flexboxes? Flexboxes are a new CSS spec, and what that means is it's just a new series of properties that can be used to style how layouts and how websites work. It's very flexible and very powerful, and it was kind of made with a lot of the problems that modern websites have, like being responsive and kind of a lot of the other problems where a lot of people use certain things on every website, but it's also hacky, like for instance, vertically centering things. There's just not really a good way of doing that. And if you go through the Flexbox spec, there's a lot of different properties, but it's also very easy to get started. So hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll be able to start applying a lot of the Flexbox stuff and not get overwhelmed by the specs. So the way that a Flexbox works is actually very simple. There's a container. So think of the purple container as a div. And then the orange containers are just children divs. So they're just called the items, and then there's a larger container. So I'm going to be referencing this web page a lot throughout this talk. And I think it's really, really good. I reference it a lot, and you guys can pull this up if you want. It's called A Complete Guide to Flexbox on CSS Tricks. So basically, to get Flexbox working, all you have to do is this, display flex. That's it. It's very simple. And then you'll have activated Flexbox. So there's four main things that you should keep in mind when working with Flexboxes. And don't worry if any of this sounds abstract, because I'm going to go over several different demos. So the first thing is that the Flexbox properties only affect the direct children. So if I have this purple div, when I start manipulating the Flexbox properties, it only affects these elements and not the divs that are inside these divs. So it's really good thing to know. Also, for this talk, we're actually only going to be focusing on half of the Flexbox properties, which are the properties on this container, just to keep things very simple and get you guys started. Also, one other really nice thing is that when you set the parent div to display flex, it will automatically make all the children div the same height. And also by default, all these divs will be on the same row. And why? And so I actually put row in quotes because this gets a little bit tricky. So here's the next slide. So for Flexboxes, there is a default direction. So it's called the primary direction, and by default, the primary direction is just kind of the normal flow. It's just along the x-axis, and so and then there's a secondary direction. So by default, it's along the y-axis, and so you're able to use justified content to manipulate items around the x-axis, and then you can use align items to manipulate things along the secondary axis. Okay, so we're going to start with the demos just right off the bat. So right here, I have this code pen that what I have is this parent div right here, and then I just have a bunch of children divs. So this is how things look. Oops. So so you can see just like normally, if I didn't have display flex, these elements, they just break on to the next line because this is for item one, I don't have, they're not inline block, these are just divs. So they all go to the next line. So when I activate Flexbox, they all just automatically line up along the same row, and they look like this. So flex direction by default is row, and this just moves them along this axis. But I can also make it column, and now this becomes the primary flex direction. And so what that means is all these things are now kind of reversed. So justified content will change things along this axis. Can you see my cursor? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so justify content will then change things along the y-axis, and align items will change things along the x-axis. Okay, so that's very basic Flexbox stuff. Okay, so more demos, and also feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. You know, if you have the question, odds are everyone else will probably have the same question. So the first demo is vertical centering. So this is something that there has not really been a very good solution to. And with Flexboxes, it's extremely, extremely simple. So I have this, again, same idea. I have this inline, I have this one item inside of this parent div. So to center it is just one line. So let's see. So align items right here is the property that I'm going to use. So to center it, all I have to do is set the parent div to align items center. And so once I do, align, so first I activate Flexbox by doing display flex, and then I do align items center. And now it's centered. And so say I also want to center this along the horizontal axis, piece of cake too. I just do justify content, center. And so justify content, center. And boom, and now I have a div that is perfectly centered in the parent div. And that's it. That's super, super simple. Okay, so next big use case. I have these product boxes, and you see this on a lot of different websites because it's a very common pattern. And what ends up happening, let's see if I can find the actual slide somewhere. Okay, so here's a website, and this all looks well and fine. But as I start shrinking it, you can see because there's different amount of text here. Uh-oh, it's no longer straight. And there's a lot of different hacky solutions, and most of them, and a lot of them revolve around using JavaScript to dynamically change all of this. But again, this can be solved pretty easy with Flexboxes, because all you have to do, let's see, I don't have the, I have a, oh, there we go. So again, here's a bunch of different things, all on different heights and whatever. And by, again, using just Flexbox display, suddenly everything is now the same height as the parent div. So this is probably going to be easier to see if I make this 200. So yeah, so now everything is along the parent div. And so if I want to keep going making these product boxes, I probably want to space them out correctly. So I'll use justify content space around. Okay, so things are looking a lot better. And yeah, and then you can just set the widths. So one thing you can't do with Flexboxes is set the widths dynamic based off of the container, but you can just go in and just do width 60 pixels. And now everything is perfectly aligned and centered, and everything just kind of works. Okay, so now let's look at something a little bit more advanced. So say I have this nav bar that I want to make, where I have just these items just in this nav bar, vertically centered, and just these little icons on these side, and then the logo just kind of pushed all the way over here. So this is actually also very easy to do with Flexboxes, and I will show you how to do that now. Okay, so here's how I started things off with. Very simple. We just have this kind of parent, which I already set flex on, and then just these elements here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to vertically center these. And so again, we just look at, what's the property here? Justify or align items. So we do align items center. Actually, yeah, so align item center. And so now these are all centered along here. And now what I want to do is actually put all these items on the right-hand side. So back to here, I'm going to do justify content flex end. Okay, so now they're all on this side. And I kind of want to space out these like logo or these nav links more. And to do that, it's just how you normally do things. You can just use part padding or margin. So I'm going to do just margin right 15 pixels. Okay, so now I got these links. And now to push this logo all the way to the left-hand side is a very neat trick. And it's actually just another margin. So when everything is lined up like this, if you just do margin right auto, this will just automatically push the logo div all the way to the left if there's space for there to be a margin here. So if you just like, if you were to right click, you can just see that this logo just has the margin all the way pushed on the right hand side. So again, this is super, super simple, and it prevents you from having to do a lot of different divs and padding to make sure everything's centered and works correctly. All right.
You could also, I just jump in there just because it's a useful knowledge point. You could also wrap your elements and then use space between. So you could have, so if you have an image and your title for your logo, you could put that in like a branding wrapper, and then you can do your navigation links in a navigation links wrapper, and then just use space between, and that'll shoot the navigations all the way to the right and all the logos all the way to the left, because it's using all the space in between to separate them. So then if you're on different devices as you move, it'll still knows to use that space between until you hit a certain breakpoint. But that's another way of doing it. That's pretty simple if you want an alternative as well. I don't know if there's any drawbacks with the flex end stuff, but that I didn't know about that either, so that's kind of slick too. So yeah, there's more than one way to do Flexbox stuff.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of it's a very flexible system. So yeah, so space between also works. The drawback is that if I have like 3 or 4 elements here and I all want them aligned to the right-hand side, this can just give me that like right off the bat if you're not trying to do some more complicated stuff. So it's just kind of a simple solution to that. Okay, so with all that being said, the last few demos have all been pretty much manipulating the parent Flex container. And as you kind of got the idea, the Flex container allows you to just kind of do layout positioning. And what the children properties does is it allows you to dynamically increase or decrease these orange boxes. So this kind of leads me to, where am I? Here we go. Yeah. So this leads me to the next part. Do we really even need grids anymore? So let's take a look at Flexbox Grid. So this is a grid system that's entirely built with Flexboxes, and that sounds like something that's very impressive or whatever. But actually, to create these grids is actually just one line of code. Flex basis 50%. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so say we're back at this this container right here, and so currently we've been pretty much just doing all these properties of the container, but we can also change the flex item properties. So what flex basis does is it says after you've placed all these elements inside this container, what do we do with the remaining space, or how do we how do we like distribute the space of this container. So say I want the logo to actually take up 50% of this container. I can just do logo flex basis 50%. And now this takes up 50% of the space. And so basically you get a grid, right? You get a grid for free, because if you wanted to do like a column, if you wanted a column to only take up 30% of the space, you can just do flex basis 30%. So flex basis 30%, and boom, you got 30%. What's also really nice is another idea, which is flex grow. So what flex grow does is it says, if there's remaining space, how do you want to divide the space among these elements? So for instance, if I do flex grow 1, then the remaining space is divided equally among this. So if I do flex grow 2, it means that it means that this logo will take up twice as much space as the space left here. So that's kind of, if this is blowing your mind a little bit, you can always come back and kind of learn the item properties later on, which is just, all these properties are just about how you want to divide the rest of the space, how you want to distribute the space when there's like remaining space inside the container. But really, those are kind of the main things that you need to get started with Flexboxes. And let's see if there's any more slides. And yeah, and that's it. And so for reference, I recommend checking out the CSS Tricks: A Complete Guide to Flexbox. There's also a really cool website called Solved by Flexbox, which has a lot of very common problems that are kind of encountered out in the wild that are easily solved by Flexbox. And then let's see, what else do I have? Oh yeah, and then the Flexbox Grid. What's really interesting about this, if you never kind of dove into checking out how grid systems work, like how Bootstrap works, and it's just kind of magic, you can kind of look into these like source codes, and the CSS for these kinds of grids that use Flexboxes are really, really simple. It's just this. So yeah, and so that's it. That's my talk.
Really cool stuff, John. So do you actually use this on a like pretty regular basis, like, and to no longer use any of the other positioning things, or do you still use the like floating and stuff like that?
So my company just started rebuilding our entire website. So I've been using Flexboxes almost exclusively for any kind of layout stuff. If I need to whip up like a static marketing page or whatever, I'll still just use like a grid just because it's just really easy. But yeah, I'm using Flexboxes for mostly everything. And as Colin showed on like Can I Use, Flexboxes have pretty wide support. There's still like a couple of bugs that you can see which is tracked on GitHub, but those things are pretty trivial.
Yeah, once I learned Flexbox, I will not use anything else unless it's absolutely necessary, even though I just preach progressive enhancement. But like it, get it as simple as you can. But if you really want to have fallbacks, but just there's so much leveraging you can use the Flexbox that solves so many problems and keeps your code really lightweight. It's interesting to look at that Flexbox grid. I don't know if you know why that max width is set on those elements for each column, but that is a Internet Explorer fallback. So what's kind of funny and a little caveat that most people need to know when you use Flexbox is you have to set a border box, which basically allows you to set widths and margins and stuff like that without going outside of the box, which is super helpful. And you need that to actually use Flexbox properly for everything except for Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer was actually the only browser that got it right from the beginning. So now you have to do this weird hacky stuff with Flexbox because it will actually, when you use border box, it goes beyond the box, which isn't designed how it's supposed to be. Internet Explorer is the only browser that actually implemented properly. So that max width exclusively tells Internet Explorer don't go beyond 33.333% if you want a 3-column grid. So if you are, I just ran into this with client work, and that's how I know this, is I designed it, worked on every browser, and looked at Internet Explorer. I'm like, why is this wrapping onto the next row? They're only 30, they don't even reach a full 100%. It shouldn't wrap to the next row, and it's because how Internet Explorer works is it takes the width and then any margins that are on it, any borders that are on it, it goes beyond the box, so that forces a wraparound. So you have to specifically set the max width. So if anybody's out there and they're playing with it and you run into this, it's just set max width with it right away so you don't have to deal with it. There's some pretty cool things with Flexbox, and if you want to look at how I implemented some of the stuff, you can look at all my GitHub. The last 3 or 4 repos I've done is just Flexbox exclusively. So
Cool.
and with the Firehose Lightning Talks app, that's all Flexbox. So
Cool. Does anybody else have any questions for John about this Flexbox or positioning or vertically centering stuff? I feel like there's been billions of times that I've needed to do this, and I think everybody should go on Stack Overflow, find every single post about vertically centering, and fix them because they're all wrong. But yeah, does anybody have any other questions for John?
it's amazing that it took them 10 years to just be like, okay, we need a vertical center to work. Like, you had regular centering the whole time, but nobody in the beginning thought, hey, we need to vertically align something in a box somewhere.
Crazy stuff.